The wind came in mean from the mountains, carrying needles of ice that stung cheeks and found every crack in the Collins cabin. Sarah stood at the table, thick shawl looped around her shoulders, measuring oats that refused to become more, no matter how carefully she cupped them. The Bible William had kept, spine cracked, margins crowded with births and weather and deaths, rested in the cedar chest by the bed. She'd traced his name that morning where the Reverend had inked "Called Home," closed the book gently, and told herself there would be enough for the children. There had to be. Emma's laughter, high, brave, trying hard to sound carefree, carried from the yard. Thomas's voice chased it, lighter, boyish, the two of them weaving a small braid of joy against the winter's harsh teeth. Sarah let herself listen a moment longer. Then the wind shifted and the smell of snow thickened, and she stepped to the door to call them in before the dusk became dangerous. Thomas reached her first, breath puffing white, eyes bright. "Dry wood under the old oak, Mama," he reported, hugging a bundle like a prize. Emma followed with the egg basket, 3 brown ovals nested in straw. "Only 3 today," she said, chin up, refusing to apologize for the limits of small lives. Sarah kissed her forehead anyway, as if praise might fatten both eggs and spirits. They were good children. William's steadiness in the boy's careful hands, his iron in the girl's spine, and they'd learned how to stand tall without pretended pride. They ate in the steady, ritual way of poor families who honor the meal by noticing it. Porridge, a few dried apple slices, the last of the broth. Most of it finding the children's bowls without discussion. The storm pounded harder. Sleety snow began to slap the window, and the lantern flame wavered in the draft. That was when Thomas's shout cut the wind clean. "Mama, come quick!" Sarah was already at the door, bones moving before thoughts formed. Emma snatched the lantern and ran ahead. They crossed the hard, stubbled edge of the wheat field, skirts and coat flapping like torn flags, the lantern's circle of light carving jitters into the snow. At the field's margin, the lantern halted in Emma's hand, and Sarah saw what the children had seen. A horse lay like a fallen shadow, a great black stallion, whose breath steamed once, twice, then not again. The saddle was worked with Mexican silver, rain muted, but still handsome. Near the horse, a man lay crumpled, his coat rich wool, his hat half crushed, the snow around him muddied dark where blood had soaked the ground. His face was a stranger's, handsome beneath the ruin, the cheekbones strong, the mouth firm, yet his body was every man who had ever fallen far from help. Emma swallowed hard. "He's breathing." She was right. The rise of his chest was thin and ragged, but there. "We can't leave him." Leaving would have been simpler. It would have saved bandages and herbs and what was left of the broth. It would also have put a stone where Sarah's heart still beat. She knelt, fingertips on the man's throat, finding a pulse fluttering like a trapped bird. "Thomas, run. Fire high, door wide. Emma, with me." The commands came plain, practiced. Necessity had taught her that mercy moves best when it moves fast. They dragged him by his coat and shoulders, careful of the slick places where snow had turned to ice over mud. He was heavy with muscle and soaked wool, but fear lent strength, and the cabin door gave them a frame to aim at. Inside, heat hit his skin in a wave, and he flinched, eyes rolling beneath lids as if the sudden comfort hurt. Thomas had the stove roaring, Emma had water on, and Sarah, without a pause for second thoughts, cut away the coat, the shirt, the blood-stuck linen. The bullet had gone in at the ribs and out again. Close, powder burns peppered the torn fabric. No hunting accident, no stray shot at a coyote. She cleaned as she had learned to clean during the war years, when boys in 2 colors had bled on her mother's floor, and all a person could do was set her jaw and do the work. She packed the wound with herbs from her dwindling store, stitched careful, steady, and bound the rib cage tight with torn sheets. Emma fetched more cloth. Thomas held the lamp when her own hands needed both light and pressure. The man surfaced once, eyes slitting, blue and shocked and fierce. His hand reached for something that wasn't there, then spasmed, then let go. Margaret, he rasped, the name more breathed than spoken. Papers, double H, keep, safe. The words fell like pebbles into the room, making rings that spread. Sarah did not understand, not enough to matter. The only truth needed was at her fingertips, pulse, breath, heat. When he stilled again, she eased a pocket watch from his vest, silk ruined with blood. The silver case opened under her thumb. Inside, the bright face ticked, a small miracle. And on the back of the lid, an inscription, "To J.W. with eternal love, Margaret." The letters were neat, the sentiment simple. Someone had loved him completely enough to put it where his pulse could feel it. Sarah closed the case and slid it into her apron, as if keeping that love safe might help keep the man alive. Night deepened. The wind battered and bawled. Fever rose like a tide, and she fought it with willow bark and cool cloths, while Emma learned the rhythm of changing compresses, and Thomas learned the discipline of watching the door without seeing ghosts in every gust. Between mutterings, the stranger's face softened. He said, "Forgive me," once to the dark, and once he said, "home," and the word broke something tender open in Sarah that had been clenched shut since William's last winter. Toward dawn, the fever broke with a sigh. The man's breathing steadied, his color shifted from death's wax to life's pallor, and the cabin grew quiet except for the stove's hum. Emma slept crooked in a chair, Thomas on the rug with the dog, and Sarah, wide awake and bone-weary, sat sentinel. Snow scratched at the window. Somewhere far off, coyotes sang. When his eyes opened again, blue and clear beneath pale lashes, he looked first at the ceiling, then at Sarah, then at the children. Understanding took shape on his face like daybreak on a ridge. "You saved my life," he whispered, voice sandpapered by cold and blood and gratitude. Sarah nodded once. "Rest," she said, and her voice left no room for argument. He caught her hand before sleep pulled him under. "Thank you." Sincerity weighted the words. His fingers were warm now. Sarah let his hand go and let herself breathe. The storm would pass, morning would come, and whatever this stranger had brought to their door, trouble, change, blessing, all three, the Collins cabin had already decided what kind of house it would be. By the third morning, the stranger was no longer only breath and bandage. He watched the room with awareness, tracking the neat order that lived there despite want. Emma folded linens as precisely as a clerk stacks ledgers. Thomas stacked kindling in measured pyramids, counting to himself and starting over if a stick leaned. The stove gave steady heat, the way of something stubbornly kept going. Sarah changed the dressing at the man's ribs with the same care she gave to planting a row straight. The wound looked clean. Fever had loosened its grip. When she tied off the new bandage, the man cleared his throat, voice rough from sleep and pain. "Your children mind well," he said. "That's no small thing." "They've had practice," she answered, testing the wrap with her fingers. "Work teaches manners faster than scolding." The corner of his mouth shifted, something close to a smile, not quite letting itself be called one. "I owe you a name," he said. "Harrison, James Harrison." The pocket watch in her apron felt heavier for hearing it. The initials on the lid matched, neat as a clerk's hand, J.W. She nodded once, not offering much of anything until his strength matched his gratitude. "Sarah Collins," she said. "Emma and Thomas." He followed her glance to the children, who tried and failed not to listen. Mrs. Collins, he began, then stopped as if weighing what might be taken the wrong way. You didn't have to. A small fist of wind banged the shutter, and with it came the sound of hooves. Emma stiffened. Thomas looked to the rifle pegs by the door without meaning to. Sarah had the door unlatched with a hand that did not shake. Outside, 3 riders pulled up hard, trampling slush into the yard. They wore trail dust and the kind of confidence that comes from getting their way more often than not. The one in front tipped his hat as if the gesture might turn his eyes polite. "Afternoon, ma'am. We're looking for a friend who might have got himself turned around in last night's blow. Tall fellow, fine coat, rides a black stallion." Sarah set herself in the doorway the way she did when a heifer thought of bolting. "Wind erased most tracks," she said evenly. "No one's come through here." He studied her face in the uncomfortable way men like him studying anything they wanted to move past. Behind him, one of his companions let his gaze skate over the barn and the stacked wood and the window where a child's shadow had just been pulled discreetly out of sight. "Mind if we look around?" the leader asked, voice oily as lamp smoke. "I do," she replied. "My children are inside." She let the sentence end there and mean what it meant, no further. For a breath, the yard held its air, the way a man holds his temper. Then the leader made his calculation and smiled the kind of smile that isn't for sharing. "Much obliged, ma'am," he said. "If you see anything unusual, you send word." He angled his horse, and the 3 rode off in a clatter that took too long to fade. Sarah shut the door and turned the latch. In the back room, James had swung his legs to the floor, jaw tight against the cost. "Not friends," he said. It wasn't a question. "Not the kind to keep," she answered. She poured water from the kettle, set it beside him, and waited. He reached into his ruined coat and brought out a folded paper, edges worn from being handled more than once. She opened it and read the words that lived on deeds. The Double H Ranch, the signature that matched the watch, the weight of land written into lines and seals. "You own the Double H," she said, understanding now the quality of the coat and the saddle silver, understanding something of the man who lay on her quilt. He nodded once. "And because of that, a man named Marcus Blackwood wants what's mine, and what belongs to anyone too small to fight him alone. He started as my backer when banks wouldn't touch a young upstart. When I wouldn't turn the ranch into his kind of empire, strip the valley, break small outfits on purpose, he turned to other means. What I carried that night would have put him on the far side of the law. He decided to keep me from showing it." The room seemed to contract and then settle. She thought of the rider's eyes, of the stallion dead in her field, of the powder burns at the stranger's ribs. "You brought trouble to my door," she said, plain. She didn't mean it as accusation so much as an inventory item that needed its own line. "I did," he said, "and you put your hands between it anyway." Silence held long enough for the stove to sigh. Sarah folded the deed and set it down. "We don't take charity," she said, because the sentence had bones in it. He reached for a second paper, this one crisp with fresh ink, and slid it across. "Then don't," he said. "Take work, take respect, take partnership. Your land grazes true. Your head runs straighter than most foremen I've paid. I need a breeding outpost to the east. You need a barn that doesn't threaten to fall and seed bought on time. We sign this as equals. You manage here under your name, and profits split fair. The store, the mercantile, the yard will extend you credit on my account, but you'll sign your own tickets. You answer to the work, not to me." Sarah read, lips moving, finger stopping to trace lines that protected her from the kinds of traps men sometimes wrote into paper. Repairs would be improvements attached to her title. Wages would land regular.
Profits would be counted in daylight. No clause made her beholden beyond the terms a decent person would honor. Emma stood at the doorway, trying not to look as if her whole heart had moved into her eyes. "Mama," she said softly, "if the barn roof didn't sag, the heifers wouldn't catch cold every time it storms." Thomas stood behind her, jaw set, wanting to be useful and to be asked. "I could mend fence proper if we had wire enough," he added, words careful, hope held low like a candle out of the wind. Sarah felt pride rise like heat. Pride had kept the family upright through a winter of thin meals and thinner comfort. Pride had hands, though, and could work beside help if help came honest. She set the contract beside the deed and the Bible, the three of them together like ingredients that might make bread if needed right. "I'll have Reverend Matthews read it," she said, "and Mr. Jenkins at the bank, and the school teacher, who knows more about numbers than anyone in town admits. I'll give you my answer in 3 days." James eased back against the pillow, relief and pain in equal parts on his face. "3 days it is," he said. "I've learned patience the hard way." That night, after the children slept, Sarah opened the cedar chest and laid the contract under the Bible, not hiding it, anchoring it. The wind ran its hand along the eaves like a stray cat testing a door. She sat in William's chair and looked at the 3 objects on the table, book, deed, agreement, and tried out the shape of a future in which her hands would not only hold together a home, but build a thing large enough to last. Outside, somewhere in the dark, horses moved through snow. Inside, the room held steady. 3 days, she told herself. One more decision, taken the way she had taken all the others, with eyes open, chin level, and the children's tomorrow laid plainly in front of her.
Hammers began to speak for the Collins place before the Meadowlarks returned. By the end of the first week, their voices echoed from dawn to dark, measured strikes that set a rhythm the whole homestead learned to breathe with. Men from town, sudden as rain after a long dry, arrived when word spread that James Harrison of the Double H had put his name behind Sarah Collins. They came with tool belts and stories, with the easy respect laborers reserve for a foreman who knows the grain of wood and the worth of wages. And when Sarah gave a direction, "Square that sill, set your string there, mind the frost line," they followed without side glances, because James listened first. The new barn rose true from corner to corner. The old roof's sighing weight gave way to rafters pegged tight, braces cut to the whisper of a plane, a ridge beam straight as a prayer. Sarah moved through the skeleton with a carpenter's eye, counting fasteners in her head, measuring spans under her palm. She felt William at her shoulder the way a widow sometimes feels sunlight in winter, proof that warmth still exists. She felt something else, too, the strange lightness that comes when burdened muscles remember partnership. Town had its say, of course. The mercantile's porch collected opinions like burrs. Some tongues rolled scandal around like peppermint, savoring the taste. Others, women who had kept farms upright while husbands healed or failed, watched Sarah's squared shoulders and called the gossip what it was, idle noise that blew away when work came near. Sarah didn't answer rumor with words. She answered with a plumb line, with ledger columns that balanced, with a crew dismissed on time and paid full measure. For Emma and Thomas, the world widened. The first pair of horses, soft-eyed, patient, chosen for teaching, stepped off the delivery wagon and into the children's keeping as if they had been waiting at the fence all along. James put a bridle in Emma's hands and showed her the cheek piece, the brow band, the way leather warms to careful fingers. "A horse tells on you," he said, slipping 2 fingers under the bit to test the fit. "If you doubt yourself, he'll doubt too. If you sit steady, he'll carry what you ask." Emma met the mare's gaze, shoulders firming as if she'd found an invisible straightedge inside herself. When she mounted, her back lengthened. When the mare stepped, confidence flowed through contact like current in a copper wire. Thomas, smaller and more solemn, learned the conversation of legs and reins in quiet loops along the fence line, James jogging beside, until the boy's seat steadied. "Breathe," James reminded, palm light against a stirrup leather. "She feels that, too." Thomas breathed, and the gelding's ears flicked back in agreement. Afternoons, while carpenters called for lengths and measurements, James brought out a sheaf of breeding charts and showed Emma where numbers and bloodlines knit into sense. "Mathematics is a rancher's second saddle," he told her, pencil tapping figures. "You fall without it." Emma's delight at the pattern in the columns, calving percentages turning into feed calculations, bloodlines turning into predictions written out in tidy script, made Sarah's chest ache with gratitude she had no words for. Someone had put a key into her daughter's hand and taught her the lock it fit. Evenings spilled softer. Sarah mended by the window, while James told trail stories that smelled of dust and tasted of bitter coffee, leaving out the parts that would trouble young sleep and lingering on the parts where humor outwitted danger, where a quick hand saved a greenhorn from a bronc's ill temper. The children leaned forward, completely themselves. Emma greedy for detail, Thomas tracing the shape of a campfire with a fingertip on the table as if he could commit warmth to muscle memory. On a Tuesday bright as tin, a saddle arrived for Emma, tooled with morning glories that climbed the skirts and twined around the cantle. The leather held the faint sweetness of oil and newness. Emma touched the carving as if she were reading Braille. "It's beautiful," she breathed. James cleared his throat, the way a man does when emotion rises where the world can see it. "Margaret liked them," he said simply. "Felt right to borrow her joy and tie it to yours." Emma's arms went around his waist before shyness could recall them. He froze a fraction of a second, then folded her in with care, one hand at the back of her head, as if steadiness could be given by touch. This, too, the town noted. The way James did not rush the distance between himself and the Collins children. The way he let them set the pace of trust. In return, the children set chairs for him without asking, saved him the last biscuit without announcing it, and turned their faces to him first when a hawk traced a slow spiral over the pasture. Bonds grew the way good rope is twisted, strand by strand, tension and give held in balance. When the school board met, 3 farmers and a merchant who were always tired of something, James took a chair in the corner and spoke only when asked. He offered lumber to be cut by the same crew raising the Collins barn for a proper shelf of books. Coin for a second teacher so the younger children could master letters while the older ones measured the angles of a new water gate. A promise to bring in 2 crates of copybooks from Denver before the roads turned to soup. "I'll sign the pledge," Sarah added quietly, surprising them all. "A nickel a month for as long as there's wheat in my bin." It was a small number, spoken like a vow, and somehow it steadied the larger gift. That night, map paper covered the kitchen table. The new parlor, penciled in soft gray, sat where afternoon sun pooled. 2 small bedrooms squared off the far wall. "They'll wake to light," James said, pointing. "It matters." Sarah traced the rectangles, already placing hooks on the backs of doors, already measuring where Emma's sewing box would live and where Thomas would stack the planes he had inherited. She could almost hear the feet that would pound those floors, their children's first, perhaps more in time, if God and courage agreed. Later on the porch, the day settled blue and gold. The new roofline cut a clean shape against it. The scent of sawned pine and horse and supper drifted out. The sound of utensils in a washpan counted time. James leaned his forearms on the rail, looking out the way men do when they are checking fence and cataloging blessings at once. "I built the double H to fill a quiet I didn't know how to live inside," he said, voice low. "Big as it is, it never answered back. This place," he nodded toward the barn, toward the window where Emma's shadow crossed and recrossed with a lamp, toward the yard where Thomas lined up stones with the precision of a surveyor, "answers." Sarah didn't look at him. She looked where he looked. "Work has a sound when it's welcome," she said. "Lonely places don't echo right." They stood without speaking for a long slice of evening, as if silence itself were a plank they were measuring and fitting into place.
Before bed, she wrote a line in the small ledger she'd begun keeping for the venture, that now bore both their names. Barn frame complete to ridge, rafters set. 2 horses settled. Emma trotted true. Thomas learned a new knot. The house felt larger. She paused over the last word, then left it, because that was the truth no arithmetic could capture. Walls, yes, but also rooms inside the heart where light had not reached in a long while. When she snuffed the lamp, the barn's new silhouette held the sky. The old cabin seemed to stand taller beside it, as if bolstered by proximity to something built for tomorrow. In her bed, Sarah listened to the changed night. The absence of drip where the old roof had leaked, the deeper quiet that comes when hope has weight and shape. Somewhere in the dark, a nighthawk sketched a soft arc. From the pallet by the hearth, a man's breathing settled into the house's rhythm. And in the deep center of a woman who had kept everything alive by herself for a long time, a truth rooted. Even the strongest beams are truest when braced.
The air went wrong by mid-afternoon. It went green and heavy, and the wind found a hollow note that didn't belong to any ordinary storm. Sarah stepped to the porch and tasted metal the way folks claimed they could taste lightning. Clouds stacked like dark anvils over the far hills. Chickens muttered. The horses shifted in their corral and stared north with both ears forward. Emma burst from the house with a coil of rope and the emergency ledger James had insisted they keep. Thomas came right behind, hat jammed low, jaw set. They had rolled their eyes at drills at first, signal whistles, water barrels, brace poles cut and stacked by the barn door, but repetition had laid a track in their muscles, and now they followed it without wasting breath. James was a dark rider against the pale field, rushing in from the Double H, with his coat snapping and his gelding taking ground like a creature who knew the why without needing the words. He slid from the saddle before it truly stopped, eyes gone hard and bright. "Cellar in 10, he said, already gentling his tone for the children. "Emma, supplies from the list. Thomas, you and I, barn." He looked to Sarah, and the flicker of argument she had loaded died at the steadiness he offered. "You're with me," he added, as if they had always worked in harness. Wind shouldered them as they crossed the yard. It carried grit that stung cheeks, and a long moan moved across the prairie like a freight train still far off. In the barn, animals rolled eyes white and stamped restlessly. "Easy," Thomas crooned, the word taught by James and now his own. "Easy, girl." They moved horses to the inner stalls and tied quick-release knots. Emma hustled in with the canvas bag of lamp oil, blankets, and the tin with spare matches, set it by the cellar door, and was back with a last armload before the next gust slammed the siding. A crack of lightning split close enough to show every nail-head in the rafters. With the light came the truth Sarah most feared to see. The main beam had a black seam down its length where last week's hard freeze had opened old weakness. The sound that followed, a deep, tired groan, was a kind of refusal the building made against the sky. "Beam!" Emma yelled, voice sharp and useful. James didn't waste a heartbeat. He put his shoulder under the sag, while Thomas scrambled for the stored braces. "Ropes, pulley pattern," James ground out, teeth bared against the load. "Angles like we drilled." Sarah's hands moved, and the old distrust that she might not know enough didn't even try to rise. Rope over the loft hook, double half-hitch, throw to Emma, brace at 45 to the sill, wedge cut true. "On my count," Sarah said, tone like a bell. 1, 2, lift. The beam rose grudgingly, then a hair more. Emma's knot bit and held. Thomas slid the brace into place and drove the wedge home with 2 clean mallet blows. The groan eased. The roof settled into a new arrangement with itself and agreed to stay. Outside, the wind deepened until it had a shape. The air in the barn thinned in a strange, quick way. "That's close enough," James said. "Cellar, now." They ran bent over, the way prairie people do when the sky has turned into a thing that reaches down to take. In the cellar, lamplight made a small, steady sun. Dirt walls sweated cold. The children counted breaths, Emma counting quietly for both of them because Thomas's lips had dried with adrenaline. Above, the storm's voice roared and then changed pitch the way a saw changes when it bites into a knot. The ground shook as if a giant had set a foot nearby. Sarah put a hand on each child's shoulder. James stood close enough that his sleeve brushed hers. He was shaking, but in a contained way. She felt the effort it took and chose to say nothing. After a span of minutes that felt longer than Scripture allowed, the roar softened, then moved away, then frayed into ordinary thunder and rain. They waited because impatience was expensive. When they climbed back up, the world wore fresh scars. A fence lay flat. A cottonwood at the creek had been twisted until it was as ragged as a pulled thread. But the barn stood. The brace angles were true. The roofline held. They walked through, touching what they had kept. The horses blew and tossed manes, but settled under hands. The brace wedges sat like teeth. The ropes hummed quiet with the last of the strain. "I'm grateful for every time you made us practice," Emma said, trying for lightness and landing in pride. "I'm grateful you didn't argue about practicing," James answered, and the look he gave Sarah was not about timber at all. Back at the house, they took stock the way a unit does after a fight. Water? Yes. Flour? Enough. Lanterns trimmed. Injuries? Scrapes, bruises, nothing that wouldn't fade. James rolled his shoulder and flinched at the pain he had ignored when it mattered. "Sit," Sarah ordered. "You earned the chair." At the table, she cut away his torn sleeve to check the joint. The skin was already purpling in a pattern like crushed berries. No wrong angle, no pop under her fingers. "Not out," she said. "You'll hate the stiffness tomorrow." He smiled with half his mouth. "I hate it already." As she reached for a fresh bandage, something slid from his inside coat pocket and thumped softly to the floor. A small leather book, corners polished by use. She bent to pick it up and saw his name inked inside the cover. She didn't open it. He saw the hesitation, saw the care. "Go on," he said. "I've hidden enough from myself." She sat while he flexed his hand and watched the page. The handwriting was neat, precise, the same tidy mind that drew building lines and counted cattle. But the words were not plans. They were reckonings. A winter paragraph about the double H and how a big house can echo in a way that makes a man smaller than his own hat. A spring entry that remembered Margaret's laugh and how morning glories were the first thing she planted, even when wisdom said beans come first. A recent page where the letters tipped forward with urgency. Cullen's children, brave, quick, capable. Widow, steadfast, wise, sees to the bottom of a thing and then acts. Found in their hearth what I thought I'd used up. She closed the book with care, like a door that should not be slammed. He had looked away while she read, giving her privacy inside his privacy. When he looked back, the storm's leftover hardness was gone from his face. "I keep records when I don't know what else to do," he said. "Sometimes the act of writing is the only rope I've got." "Then keep writing," she answered. "Write that we held the barn and didn't lose a single animal. Write that the children did what they were taught and no one panicked." He nodded, throat working once. "May I write that you are the bravest woman I know?" "You may write that I am stubborn," she said, but the corner of her mouth softened. He laughed, then winced for it, and she lifted his arm another inch and finished the wrap. Evening came on as if it were grateful to be ordinary again. The four of them ate stew that tasted better than it had any right to. Thomas told the story of the brace like a hero ballad. Emma corrected his angles and then kissed the top of his head to soften the correction. James listened like a thirsty man drinks. When the children fell asleep, one on the rug, one in a chair, the adults washed bowls in companionable quiet. At the door, where the night pressed its cool face to the pane, they stood with their shoulders almost touching and watched the barn's new silhouette against a clearing sky. "We did that," James said, low. "We," Sarah agreed. The word felt proper in her mouth, as clean and necessary as fresh water. The wind had lost its strange taste. Stars came out one by one, each in its place. Somewhere down near the creek, a frog tried the first bold note of the season, and then, finding no answer, tried again. The letter came on a morning that glittered with frost and danger. A double H hand rode in fast, cheeks raw, and pressed the envelope into James's palm as if it were a live coal. Sarah read it beside him, the careful script a knife wrapped in velvet. "Harrison, your ready-made family looks picturesque. Shame if the picture burned." The double H could have changed hands quietly. Last warning. M. Blackwood. The air in the kitchen thinned. James folded the paper once, twice, until the threat became a hard square. He looked at Sarah as if asking permission to be angry on her behalf. She set the kettle on the iron, steady as a metronome. "We will not be scared out of the life we built," she said. It was not bravado. It was inventory, like counting sacks of seed and feet of fence wire. Sheriff Miller came when called. Papers changed hands. The deed copies, the accounts of water rights tampering, the names of men who signed deals at dusk and denied them at dawn. "I'll need time to stitch this up in town," the sheriff said. "Double your patrols till then." James nodded. Men from neighboring spreads took turns on the ridges. At home, drills became assignments. Emma checked the storm cellar and counted blankets. Thomas coiled ropes, filled barrels, and set 2 lanterns where hands could find them blind. The attack came in that mean hour before dawn, when even brave dogs whine in their sleep. Smoke braided with fog at the far pasture. Fire lines licked toward the winter-dry wheat. At the same moment, hoofbeats spilled like shot from the south draw. "They want a split," James said, already moving. "Barn, it holds more than hay." They ran as a unit, practiced enough to find their places without speech. Inside, the barn was ready because James had insisted and Sarah had agreed. Braces waited in stacks. Firing slits hid in the siding like prudent eyes. The children shepherded the Andersons, neighbors who'd been sleeping in the new parlor while their cabin was rebuilt, toward the cellar hatch set beneath feed sacks. "Stay close," Emma told the youngest, voice steady as a schoolmistress's bell. "You're safe." Gunfire started as punctuation, warning shots off the roof, a bully's grammar. James and Sheriff Miller, who had slipped back before sunset to avoid being seen leaving, took positions. "Hold," James told the men who had come at his call. "We return fire only to turn them." He hated killing when law could do the work, and Blackwood's type hated witnesses. The first rider from the south fainted toward the house. A second shoved a burning tumbleweed through the north fence. Heat's lip curled at the field's edge. Thomas's eyes flicked to the corner where the irrigation lever waited, the system James and he had sketched and dug with blistered hands and quiet pride. "We can flood a line here," the boy said, breath quick, mind faster. James's hand found his shoulder as if fastening courage into place. "Do it." Water answered like a team that knows its driver. It rolled into the north field and lay down as a shining barrier. Fire hit it and sizzled back, offended. From the south, 2 riders charged the barn door. Emma's voice rang out from a loft slit, "Left flank," and a ranch hand's aim spoiled their nerve without spoiling their lives. The night filled with motion and decisions. A bullet, luckless and ugly, found wood near the tack room and splintered through. James rocked back. Blood bloomed where the old storm bruise had been, a flower no one asked for. Sarah's hand was there faster than fear, pressing linen, pressing love through cloth.
"It's nothing," he said, and it was a lie, but the kind spoken for others. "Papa!" Thomas cried, the word ripping free before thought could filter it. It hung there, a bell note across smoke and noise. James's eyes filled in a way that had nothing to do with pain. He gripped the boy's wrist and managed a smile. "I'm here, son." The word fit. It fit so well it steadied the whole line. Hoofbeats thundered from the east, the good sound, the one that held relief. Double H hands poured over the rise, a tide of familiar hats and horses. Between them and the sheriff's men, Blackwood's riders lost their taste for theater and peeled away like shadows at noon. The rest of the fire guttered out against water and will. When quiet finally took the place, the barn smelled of smoke, sweat, horse, and victory. The Anderson children sobbed relief into Emma's skirt. Sheriff Miller clapped James's uninjured shoulder and took the threat letter as evidence. Men drifted away to stamp fire from fence posts and swear at the cost of greed. The family stayed where the fear had been and let gratitude flood the space it left. Back in the kitchen, Don stretched a pale hand over the sill. Sarah cleaned and bound James's reopened wound, while he watched the children sleep where exhaustion dropped them. Thomas on a saddle blanket, Emma halfway off a chair, hair tangled and brave. He started an apology that she cut off with a look. "We chose you," she said. "We choose you again." The kettle sang. The house answered. By late afternoon, the house had turned itself toward future as houses do when danger passes. The children disappeared and returned with a wooden box. Thomas's knife marks were careful. Emma's morning glories climbed the lid. Inside lay a simple gold band. Sarah knew it from the cedar chest and the ache it carried. William's ring, once a circle of promises, now a circle big enough to carry more. Emma's voice trembled only at the edges. "We think rings are for work as well as words." Thomas swallowed, then straightened. It should keep working. James sat very still, as if any motion might spill what his face struggled to hold. He looked at Sarah not with a question, but with a life offered. "I should be on one knee," he said, smiling crooked through the hurt. "You're exactly where you belong," she answered, and the yes in her tone met the yes in his eyes and made a new thing, settled and sure. Later, when the house had exhaled into evening, James set another set of papers on the table. Adoption petitions, names written in a careful hand. Emma Collins Harrison, Thomas Collins Harrison. "Only if they want it," he said. They did. The signatures looked both small and mighty on the lines, like saplings staked against wind. "What do we call it?" he asked softly, toying with the ring before sliding it onto Sarah's finger, beside memory, instead of over it. "Harrison and Collins both deserve a place," she said, eyes on the porch posts where vines would climb come summer. "Morning glory, for Margaret's flowers, for things that opened fresh every day, for hope that keeps blooming." The name fit the walls, the fields, the faces. Night settled without menace. Outside, the barn stood squared against the sky, braced and proud. Inside, a family inventoried its blessings the way prudent people count grain, carefully, gratefully, with an eye on tomorrow and faith enough for storms. When sleep found them, it found them together, a widow who had refused to be small, a man who had learned to spend his wealth on purpose, two children whose hands had grown capable without losing their gentleness. The wind moved along the eaves like a lullaby. The new name of the ranch, the new name of their life, seemed to rise from the floorboards and the beams, a quiet, durable promise. Morning glory.